I want to start here and fold this into the Fed, because that's what a lot of people are grappling with. If this led to an energy spike, would it lead the Fed to need to do more, need to do less? How are you thinking about these kind of issues influencing this central bank?
So first, it is really uncertain. And that has to be put first and foremost. You know, you talk about the micro issues. We hear competing news. There's also a macro issue. The market so far has been trading in a relatively range-bound way because the market believes it's either going to be resolved by a diplomatic effort, or alternatively, it will be no war and no peace for a while. The market hasn't really embraced the possibility that it could be an even broader range. So it's important to recognize that the uncertainty is even larger than what the market is pricing. As to the Fed, it will make the Fed more hesitant. As you know, I don't buy the 7 hikes for this year. I think that will be excessive. And I look at how the market has rushed to price this, and it just tells me that the Fed better get out there with guidance. Otherwise, they're really going to lose control of the policy narrative.
So, Mohamed, let me bring up the policy narrative and something Matt Hornback of Morgan Stanley said earlier this week. This was the quote. The markets are prepared for 50. If they deliver less than what the markets are hinting at in their price, then that will amount to an easing of monetary policy, and this is not the environment to be easing monetary policy. Clearly. What would you say back to that, Mohamed?
So I would say he has a point. When policymakers don't validate pricing, you get a reaction. Now, normally you would get a positive reaction on risk assets because the Fed is being more dovish. But here, inflation is a problem, and it's not going to go away. And it just highlights, John, over and over again, the corner that the Fed has put itself in. This is self-inflicted because it waited so long and it kept for way too long the mischaracterization of inflation as transitory. So we are in this world of second and third best, as you and I have discussed, and it's not clear how the Fed gets out of it. So I think he's right, but what about the opposite? What if they go 50? Will the market then price in the next one as 50 as opposed to 25? We don't know.
You said something important, though, just at the start of that comment, and it's something that reminded me of what Bob Michael of JP Morgan Asset Management said earlier this week. This idea, Mohamed, that if they don't get control of the narrative, if they don't go big, that typically what you would get, and this is more intuitive, a Fed that's more dovish, great, by the market. Bob's suggesting, Mohamed, and I heard you suggest it too, that maybe you get adverse reactions in risk assets because there is a belief the Fed does not have a handle on this. Can you build that out just a little bit more?
Yeah, the nightmare for the marketplace is stagflation. It is a tail scenario, but it is an impactful tail scenario. So how do you get stagflation? The Fed underreacts. It doesn't get control of inflation expectations. Inflation expectations get seriously de-anchored. And next thing you know, the Fed then has to slam on the brakes, but inflation is still on the way up. So the marketplace gets hit in 2 ways. And of course, the economy gets hit in 2 ways, by inflation and by stagnation of economic growth. That is the nightmare. So that's how delicate this whole situation has become. And the Fed sort of has to walk that. I worry, and let's hope today this changes, I worry that we've had absolutely no remarks whatsoever from the top leadership of the Fed. And the more quiet they've been, the more the policy narrative has escaped them.
Well, let's think about who we hear from today. We hear from Governor Waller. He's been outspoken before. Then we've got the core of the Fed. We hear from Governor Brainerd. We hear from President Williams of New York as well. Mohamed, you've done a brilliant job of showing how the window is getting smaller. You've done a fantastic job of forecasting this as the data evolves, particularly through last summer, when you start to become more alarmed about what the future might hold. What I need from you that we haven't got yet from you, Mohamed, is what you think the optimal policy response actually is from here. You've said the window's smaller. I get it. What do you think they actually need to do? If it's not 50, what is it?
So, John, when you're far away from the world of first best, there is no optimal policy response. And that's really important to note. There is a less bad policy response, but you've given up on the optionality of an optimal policy response because when that window was open to the Fed repeatedly, they didn't go through it. They didn't do anything. So there is no optimal policy response. It's a matter of how do you minimize the unintended consequences and collateral damage. Listen carefully today to John Williams. He's part of the Troika, Jerome Powell, Lael Brainerd, and John Williams. His speech is about the economic outlook. So he cannot avoid talking about policy. So that's the one that you need to listen to today.
There isn't an optimal one. What's the less bad one?
So in my view, I'd rather let inflation run higher for longer, believe it or not, than slam on the brakes and risk a recession. Okay, but it's not, it's not an easy path. And that's the sort of judgment they're going to have to make. I truly believe that if we get 7 rate hikes and we get QT, this economy will not be able to absorb this. This economy has been conditioned for so long to live with liquidity injections and floored interest rate that this would be too dramatic a change for many parts of it.
What I hear from you then, Mohamed, is that there is no soft landing. Is that a fair characterization of what you're saying?
There's no long-term soft landing. You can have the appearance of softest landing and push back the problem into next year, but ultimately you're going to have to deal with the fact that the Fed has fallen behind inflation, and now it simply has to not optimize but satisfies, and that's a very different policy regime.
Can we turn to the market consequences of that? Mohamed, if you're saying you believe the less bad response, not optimal, but less bad response, is to allow inflation to run harder for longer, because ultimately they've got no choice. If they do the 7 that it might take to bring this down and bring it down quickly, we'll end up in a bad place. What are the market consequences of that, Mohamed?
So there's a good part of the market that believes in a couple of things. It believes that supply chain disruptions are going to solve themselves quickly. They will ultimately solve themselves, but it's too quickly. And it believes that there's a productivity gain around the corner. So for that part of the marketplace, okay, it will be fine to go slow by the Fed because they believe that we have self-corrective elements into the marketplace. There's another part of the marketplace that says, actually, this is not happening fast enough. The bottom line, John, is we're going to continue to see a lot of volatility. And it's not just, there's a tendency to think this is just about Ukraine and Russia. But there's much more than that, as I'm going to argue in the Financial Times next week.
Your promo for the FT next week, Mohamed, on this show. Mohamed, really? You're not going to give us a hint, a tease of what's John, in the article?
No, because then you wouldn't read it. Not that you read it anyway, but you wouldn't read it for sure.
I always read it. Mohamed, we'll leave it there. It's good to catch up.